The coffee shop did not seem to obey time properly. Hours passed there in a way that felt both heavy and strangely suspended, as though the little place had wedged itself between moments and decided to remain. Outside the tall windows, clouds drifted below starlight one moment and beneath the pale wash of something like dawn the next. Jihye gave up trying to understand it. The room itself was warm, all dark wood and amber lamps, the air rich with roasted beans, old paper, and the faint medicinal scent of whatever passed for pastries in a place between dimensions. Their table had become a battlefield. Books lay open in precarious stacks, some held flat by mugs, some by daggers, some by the simple stubborn pressure of Raphael's long-fingered hands. Loose pages and notes covered every spare inch of the table. DJ had somehow produced more pens than seemed physically possible. Caleb had stopped asking where they came from. Joaquin sat with one leg folded beneath him and a book balanced on his knee, his usual grace strained now by the sheer quantity of terrible handwriting he had been forced to endure. Estertrix had taken a chair slightly apart from the rest, but not far enough to suggest indifference. His long fingers turned pages with surprising care, though every so often his lip would curl faintly at some human scholar's attempt to describe creatures of the deep in a language more hopeful than accurate. Raptor had taken to research with a single-mindedness that reminded Jihye of the way he had packed his diving suit. Precise, determined, driven by something deeper than curiosity. He had abandoned his coat somewhere under the growing mountain of tomes and sat in his shirt sleeves with ink smudged across one hand and a furrow between his brows that had not eased in hours. DJ, meanwhile, thrived in the chaos. He moved around the table in quick orbits, carrying refilled cups, shifting stacks, muttering comments over shoulders, occasionally vanishing into another aisle, only to return with a triumphant little noise and a book no one had asked for, but which he insisted was relevant on a conceptual level. Jihye sat near the edge of the table, one hand curled around a mug that had long since gone cold, the other tracing idle patterns against the green glass shard in her pocket. The amulet beneath her shirt remained warm, not painfully so, just present, a low, patient heat that made it impossible to forget. The blue-haired traveller's words lingered in her mind. Trust yourself. Let the memories you are holding back be free. It was difficult advice to follow when every answer they found only seemed to widen the shape of what they did not know. Raphael exhaled slowly and closed another book with measured irritation. These accounts contradict each other every 3 pages. DJ leaned over his shoulder and peered at the text upside down. That one was written by a man who believed salt water caused melancholy and theft. I would not trust his theology. That would have been useful to know before I read 2 chapters of it, Raphael said. I assumed you'd enjoy the misery. You assume wrongly. Across the table, Caleb looked up from a diagram that appeared to depict either a magical seal or an elaborate recipe for soup. Most of these books mention the old gods in terms so vague they could be describing weather, hunger, light, the end of crops. It's all metaphors. Mortals tend to use metaphor when the truth is too large for their language, Estertrix said, without lifting his gaze from the paper in front of him. Joaquin closed one book and set it aside with obvious relief. Then perhaps the problem is not the language, perhaps the truth itself resists being known. Cheerful, Caleb murmured. That was cheerful, Joaquin replied. It was in the middle of this, while DJ was arguing with Buddy through a small receiver about whether the term apocalyptic adjacency was useful shorthand, that someone new approached the table. Jihye first noticed her because of the colour. Purple. Not bright or gaudy, but the deep and rich kind. purple that lived in twilight flowers and old bruises. The woman who had stopped beside them wore it in layers, in a shawl draped around her narrow shoulders, in ribbons tied around the end of long brown braid that reached nearly to her waist. Her face was sharp in a clever, attractive way, and her eyes glittered with immediate interest. She carried herself lightly, like someone used to moving through crowded spaces without ever truly being caught by them. "Sorry to interrupt your collective descent into madness," she said, voice warm and bright without tipping into shrill. "But you look like people who have finally reached the point where outside help becomes either sensible or unavoidable." DJ looked up and grinned. "Delphi!" The woman smiled back. "DJ?" Raphael's posture sharpened slightly, but he remained polite. "And you are?" "Helpful," she said first, then relented. "Delphi, passing witch, occasional potioneer, professional listener of things I ought not to know." She glanced across the spread of books, then at Jihye, then at Estatrix, and one brow lifted with something like appreciation rather than alarm. "Oh yes," she said softly, "this is certainly above average." Jihye did not know whether to be reassured or more afraid. Delphi turned, and without waiting for permission, crossed the room towards a narrow counter tucked near the back wall that Jihye had assumed belonged to the barista. Instead, it appeared to be some kind of potion desk, stacked with jars, bundles of dry herbs, and a truly alarming array of labelled vials. Delphi ducked behind it, vanished briefly from sight, and then resurfaced with a precarious armful of books. Not new books. Dusty, leather-bound, crooked-spined things that looked as though they had not been touched in decades. She returned to the table and let them fall with a series of heavy thuds that made Caleb jump and DJ clap in delight. "There," Delphi said, brushing dust from her fingers. "These are terribly unsanitary, and at least one of them is mildly cursed, but they're useful. Old God liturgy, pre-collapse memory cult references, and one very niche coastal mythography that should have been burnt but wasn't. You're welcome." Raphael looked at her with new attention. "You knew what we were researching." Delphi tilted her head. "You people radiate the sort of problem that leaves a taste in the air." Estatrix closed his book softly. "And yet you walked over anyway?" She gave him a quick, amused glance. "Curiosity is a flaw I nurture." Then she sat, and just like that she joined them. Hours slipped by. Delphi proved useful in the exact irritating way that truly competent people often were. She knew where references hid between layers of nonsense. She could skim an index and identify which chapters mattered. She translated archaic idioms with casual ease and once corrected a mistranslation that had apparently gone unchallenged across 3 dimensions. Jihye found herself watching the witch's hand as much as she did her face. Delphi handled the books gently, reverently almost, but her mind moved quickly. Too quickly to be entirely ordinary. Even DJ seemed content to defer to her on matters of ancient paper and cursed footnotes. By the time Jihye's coffee had gone cold a second time, and Buddy had gently informed them all that their collective hydration profile was becoming concerning, the table had narrowed its chaos to something like purpose. They had found more references to the old gods, more accounts of fear, more mentions of Arcanthus's cruelty, his disdain, his appetite for obedience, but nothing concrete enough, nothing useful enough. Until Raptor made a sound sharp enough to cut through everything. "I have it." Every head turned. Rapture sat frozen over one of Delphi's dusty books, finger pressed so hard to the page that the knuckle had gone white. His face was pale, eyes wide behind his glasses. DJ leaned halfway across the table. "Do you, or are you having some sort of scholarly episode?" Rapture ignored him. He swallowed once, looked up at Jihye, and there was apprehension in his expression now, unmistakable and immediate. "What?" Jihye asked, the word quieter than she intended. Raptor looked back at the page. It's a narrative fragment. Pre-binding. It mentions Arcanthus by name. The room went still. "Read," Raphael said. Raptor nodded, though his voice shook when he began. "It says," he squinted, "Arcanthus, grown complacent in dominion and fat with indolence, did not attend the murmurings of rebellion until they rose too loud to be ignored. When at last the lesser people stood against him, he descended in wrath to quell them, expecting supplication and finding instead defiance." Raptor paused, eyes flicking once more toward Jihye before continuing. "At the sight of rebellion, there stood his daughter, a red-haired figure shrouded in flames that danced about her as though in devotion. Arcanthus snarled to her, 'You dare defy me?' Jihye's fingers tightened around her mug. Raptor went on, voice lower now, caught by the shape of the scene. "And she grew." Caleb's breath caught softly. "I dare," she replied. Jihye stared at the page as if she could see the memory in it. Raptor swallowed again. He told her, "You were born of me. How dare you think you can defeat me?" His voice faltered, then steadied. And the daughter smirked and muttered to him, "Born of you and the dark." Silence felt so sharply that even the music in the coffee shop seemed to recede. Fear, ancient and immediate, moved across Acanthus's face in the telling. Jihye could feel it, could see it through Raptor's voice, as if the memory had reached for her. Raptor kept reading. Fear lit in Arcanthus's eyes, and the daughter fired flame to enshroud him, watching him burn and scream until he knelt, pleading mercy. Something in Jihye's chest twisted hard enough to hurt. Raptor's voice had become almost reverent now, horrified and fascinated in equal measure. Something flickered in the daughter then, as if an internal struggle was happening within her, and she screamed. He looked up briefly. "Bind him now!" Raphael's jaw tightened. The mages nearby chanted words, Raptor continued. Arcanthus and the daughter both, unconscious and weak. And the mages collapsed, their magic bound within the spell that chained the two gods. He stopped. The moon remained silent for several heartbeats. At last Raphael said, "Does it say any more?" Raptor shook his head slowly. "Not about that moment." "About the mages?" Raphael said quickly. "Their names, their order, their bloodline?" Raptor scanned the page again, then the one after it, then looked up and shook his head once more. "No." The silence that followed was different now. Heavier, more precise. Something had been found, and it had not comforted anyone. Jihye felt all their eyes on her without anyone actually looking. Finally, she said the only thing her mind could catch hold of. "What is the dark?" No one answered. Not DJ, not Raphael, not Estertrix. Not even Delphi, though the witch had gone very still. The question hung there, absurd and simple, the kind of question a child might ask if she had not just discovered that she had once set a god on fire. Jihye looked from face to face. "If I was born of Arcanthus and the dark, what does that mean?" Delphi sighed. It was not theatrical. It was the sound of someone who knew the answer would not improve the room. "The dark," she said slowly, "is the oldest god." Jihye's blood ran cold. The one that belongs to no dimension, Delphi continued. Not yours, not his, not mine. It does not love, does not hate, does not judge. It simply is. No feeling, just power. Jihye stared at her. How can I be born of Arcanthus and the dark? Delphi lifted one shoulder in a half shrug that somehow managed to look sympathetic and utterly unhelpful at once. You've got me there, girl, she said. I just deal in cats. And as if that settled the matter, she rose from the table. 2 new customers had arrived at the counter, one with antlers and one made, apparently of light. Delphi gave them all a little wave with ink-stained fingers and drifted away to serve them, as though she had not just casually identified the oldest god in existence. No one spoke for several seconds after she left. Then, DJ smiled. This, he announced, is great news. Estatrix turned to him with visible disgust. You're diseased. How? Joaquin asked, in the dangerously patient tone of a man already regretting the question. Is any of this great news? DJ pointed at Raptor's book. Because we have progression. Caleb found. Progression toward what? Knowledge, DJ said brightly. Obviously. Clearly the dark power is how she defeated him, and the mages did the binding. That's excellent. It means the previous model was not purely theoretical. Raphael, despite himself, nodded faintly. He may actually have a point. DJ looked insufferably pleased. Of course I do. Before this, we had one large ignorance. Very broad, very vague, annoying to work with. He raised one finger. Now we have 3 specific ignorances. A second finger. We do not know what the dark is in practical terms. A third. We do not know how it works through her. He tapped the table. And we do not know who the mages were or exactly what they did. He spread his hands. This is wonderful. Contained problems are much more elegant than sprawling ones. Raphael leaned back slightly, eyes narrowing in thought. Shift the research, he said. The dark. Everything we can find. Origins, manifestations, worship patterns, dimensional anomalies, references in pre-binding accounts. If Jihye is going into that machine, she goes in with as much context as we can arm her with. Jihye exhaled, slow and shaky. The words born of you and the dark still ran through her. She wanted to reject them, to fold herself inward and deny the possibility. But the green shard in her pocket felt cool and steady, and the amulet beneath her coat remained warm as if listening. Trust yourself. The group bent back over the books, this time with purpose sharpened. Raphael began assembling references, building a neat pile where before there had been chaos. Joaquin took texts on creation myths and early dimensional crossings, his expression set in that focused stillness she had come to trust. Caleb searched through ritual accounts and theological glossaries with determined care, lips moving faintly as he deciphered older phrasing. Raptor returned to the fragment about Arcanthus' daughter, cross-referencing every mention of fire, rebellion, and unnamed gods. Estatrix did not reach for a book immediately. Instead, he sat back and watched Jihye. Not with suspicion, not exactly. With calculation. At last he spoke, voice quiet enough that only she and perhaps Joaquin could hear. If the dark touched you once, he said, then it may still know your shape. Jihye met his gaze. That is not comforting. No, Estatrix agreed, but comfort is not the same thing as usefulness. Joaquin, still looking at his page, said softly, nor is fear. Jihye let out a breath that might almost have become a laugh if her chest had not felt so tight. Hours later, the table looked no tidier, but it did look more deliberate. Books about the dark had begun to form their own stack. References to nameless voids, oldest powers, pre-dimensional entities, and gods unclaimed by worship had surfaced in fragments. Nothing clear yet, but enough to chase. DJ returned with fresh coffee and a plate of suspiciously luminous biscuits. "No one take the glowing ones," he said. Caleb pulled his hand back immediately. The fire in the blue hearth shifted. Outside the impossible windows, stars drifted in colours Jihye had never seen. Somewhere in another part of the shop, Delphi laughed at something one of her customers had said. And at the centre of it all, Jihye sat with ancient books, impossible allies, and the knowledge that once, in another life, she had made a god kneel. It should have felt empowering. Instead, it felt like standing at the edge of a cliff and finally realizing the wind had your name. Still, she reached for another book. They were closer now than they had been. Not safe, not ready, but closer. And for the first time since Buddy had told them the full truth, Jihye found she could bear the idea of the machine waiting in another room. Because whatever she found in her memories next, she would not face it blind.